It was late October of 2022 when I decided to take an overnight train ride across the countryside. I had always been fascinated by trains, their rhythmic clatter, and the way they seemed to carry stories along with passengers. This was supposed to be a peaceful trip, just me, a book, and the endless stretch of tracks. But what happened on that journey still sends chills down my spine. The train departed just after sunset. The station had been bustling with life, but as soon as the train pulled out, the crowds were left behind, replaced by the dark stillness of the night. My cabin was small but cozy, with a window that offered a view of the vast, moonlit landscape. I settled into my seat, opened my book, and let the gentle sway of the train lull me into a sense of calm. There weren't many passengers on this train, which added to the serene atmosphere. Occasionally, I'd hear the muffled voices of a family down the hall, or the faint hum of a conductor's radio. For the first couple of hours, everything was uneventful. But as we entered a particularly desolate stretch of track, the mood began to shift. It started with the lights. They flickered once, then again before stabilizing. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. Perhaps it was just a minor power issue, I thought. But then, I felt a strange sensation, as if the air had grown heavier, colder. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and tried to focus on my book, but the words seemed to blur together. My attention kept drifting to the window. The scenery outside had changed. Gone were the rolling fields and scattered farmhouses. Instead, there was a dense forest, its twisted trees casting long skeletal shadows. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy, leaving much of the landscape shrouded in darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be here, that the train had veered off its intended path. As I stared out the window, I noticed something unusual, a small, dilapidated train station coming into view. It wasn't on the schedule, and it didn't look like it had been in use for decades. The platform was overgrown with weeds, and the station's sign was so faded that I couldn't make out the name. The train slowed as we approached, eventually coming to a full stop. "Why are we stopping?" I muttered to myself. There was no announcement from the conductor, no indication that this was a planned stop. I looked around, but the other passengers in my car were either asleep or too engrossed in their own worlds to notice. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the corridor. The train was eerily silent. The only sound, the faint creak of the metal as it settled on the tracks. I made my way to the nearest exit and hesitated, peering out onto the platform. The air was bitterly cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The station's single lamppost flickered weakly, casting a dim yellowish light that barely illuminated the platform. I stepped off the train, my boots crunching on the gravel, and approached the station building. It was small, with boarded-up windows and a door hanging slightly ajar. Something about this place felt wrong. The silence was oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But I couldn't bring myself to turn back. My curiosity had taken hold, and I needed to know more. I pushed the door open, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the station was even more decrepit than it appeared from the outside. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floor was littered with debris papers, broken glass, and what looked like the remnants of old furniture. A ticket booth stood at the far end, its glass window cracked and clouded with dust. As I moved further inside, I noticed something strange. A series of photographs pinned to a corkboard on the wall. They were old, black and white, and depicted passengers standing on the platform outside. But there was something off about them. The people in the photos looked wrong. Their faces were blurred, distorted, as if they had been caught in motion. Yet the rest of their bodies were perfectly still. A chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. A faint shuffling sound, like footsteps. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. Just the creak of the building settling and the distant hum of the train idling on the tracks. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the silence was playing tricks on me. But as I turned back to the photographs, I froze. One of the pictures had changed. A figure now stood on the platform in the background, a tall, shadowy silhouette that hadn't been there before. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The longer I looked, the more the figure seemed to come into focus. It was wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, its face obscured by shadows. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. I needed to leave. Now. I rushed out of the station and back toward the train, but as I reached the platform, I stopped in my tracks. The shadowy figure from the photograph was there, standing at the far end of the platform. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its gaze on me. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move, to get back on the train. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and bolted it. My fellow passengers were still oblivious, some of them asleep, others staring out their windows as if nothing had happened. I found my seat and sank into it, my hands trembling. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that the eerie atmosphere had gotten the better of me, but deep down, I knew better. The train started moving again, pulling away from the station and back into the forest. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, half expecting to see the figure standing on the tracks, watching us leave. But there was nothing. For the rest of the journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced down the corridor or into the reflection in the window, I thought I saw a flicker of a shadow, a hint of motion. But when I looked closer, there was nothing there. When the train finally pulled into my destination the next morning, I was the first to disembark. The station was bustling with life, a stark contrast to the desolation of the night before. But even as I stepped into the bright sunlight, I couldn't shake the memory of that shadowy figure or the unsettling photographs. It's been months since that night, but I still think about it often. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I'll hear the faint sound of a train whistle in the distance, and it sends a shiver down my spine. I've tried to find information about that station, to see if anyone else has experienced what I did, but there's no record of it. No mention of its existence. It's as if it was never there at all. And yet, I know what I saw. I know that somewhere out there, on a forgotten stretch of track, that station still stands. And I can't help but wonder who or what was waiting for me that night.